The American Indian Studies class at Green Hope High School is pleased to present to you this recording of our roundtable discussion with Native American leaders from Wake County and across North Carolina that was conducted in December 2020.
Okay, so I think we're going to get going now. Thank you to all of our guests who are here and our panelists as well. So welcome to this panel discussion. So we created this panel as a project for our American Indian Studies class, and it was originally created for American Indian Heritage Month, which if you don't know is in November. And even though it's a little bit late, we still hope it can be meaningful to all of you guys. So our goal in creating this panel was to further educate ourselves and our peers by bringing Indigenous voices to our local and school communities. So for our guests to know, we'll be addressing issues that pertain to American Indian people and their communities. This panel was organized by myself, Noreen Mohamed, Alexander Naskov, Sophia Woodson, and Zoey, who sadly was not able to join us as a moderator tonight. And we probably, as you've already seen, have our American Indian Studies teacher, Mr. Hutchison, as well here with us tonight. And we also have several fantastic panelists who have so kindly agreed to participate in this discussion. So if you all could just go ahead and introduce yourselves with your name, what tribal organization you're affiliated with, and a little bit about the organization in which you're representing tonight, if that's applicable to you.
Sure. My name is Kerry Bird. I am Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate from South Dakota. My mom was a Lumbee from North Carolina. I was born and raised here in North Carolina, and I currently serve as president of Triangle Native American Society. And we're a nonprofit organization. We're an urban Indian organization recognized by the state of North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs as an official Native organization here in North Carolina. We started out as a social organization, but we currently serve as a social, cultural, educational organization serving the Native American population in the 5 county service areas of Wake, Johnston, Chatham, Orange, and Durham counties. And that's a little bit about me. I'm a graduate of UNC Chapel Hill, so go Tar Heels. But also support all North Carolina colleges here in North Carolina. So welcome.
Thank you so much for that. If you guys could just go down the list. So Melissa Lee, if you would introduce yourself next, that would be great. So I don't know if she's having technical difficulties, but we can go on to Miss Zoey Locklear and come back.
So hello everybody, my name is Zoey Locklear. I'm a proud member of the Lumbee and the Kerry tribes of North Carolina. I'm the secretary of the North Carolina Native American Youth Organization, and our acronym is NCNAO. And NCNAO is a nonprofit, student-based, Native-based organization that serves the Native youth all across North Carolina. We work in different tribal communities to organize social events. We represent powwows and different cultural community activities, and we really are here for Native students, and it's been really amazing to see the transition to an all virtual format, as our executive board, myself included, have been able to do that. I'm also a student at Clinton High School in the North Carolina School of Science and Math, and I'm a senior.
Thank you for that. Ms. Gwen Locklear, if you would introduce yourself next.
I'm Gwen Locklear, a member of the Lumbee tribe, and I am the coordinator for the Wake County Public Schools Title VI Indian Education Program. It's a program that provides services to the American Indian youth here in Wake County schools. We serve K through 12. And I am a graduate of UNC Pembroke, and I've been in Raleigh for about 38 years, or so, I guess. But I grew up in Pembroke, Robeson County.
And thank you for that. And if we could have our next panelist introduce herself, that would be great.
Shio nagara di ashkayan dagwado za galialiga di doha. I am Chi Shipman. I am a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, and I am an adult language learner with the CALL program that is with New Kadua Academy. We spend 26 hours a week immersed in the language, learning language from our first language speakers. And I'm a mom, I'm a student, and I've just been trying to learn more about my people and trying to share that information with everyone. So yeah, Chiki.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists and for letting us get to know you a little bit better. So I'll now turn it over to Noreen, who will be moderating the next topic.
Thank you, Makayla. So our first topic for tonight will be focused on the coronavirus and other current issues that impact Native people. To begin, the coronavirus has disproportionately affected Indigenous people, and according to the CDC, American Indians and Alaskan Natives are 1.8 times more likely to test positive for COVID, 4 times more likely to be hospitalized, and 2.6 times more likely to die from the virus than that of non-Hispanic whites. Issues related to lack of resources and race-based health disparities have been said to increase the impact left by the pandemic on Indigenous communities. So the first question for tonight is for Mr. Bird, who is the president of Triangle Native American Society. Firstly, how has COVID-19 changed how any of you stay connected with your culture and interact with your community? And if so, how?
Mr. Bird, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. I guess first of all, powwows here in North Carolina typically occur in the fall of the year, and so in September and October are our busiest powwow season. And obviously this year they had to cancel all powwows that were being held here in North Carolina. So, and powwows serve as a means for our communities to stay connected. And so it's very much like a homecoming for us. It's when you get to see family and friends and interact. So from that standpoint, it's been very restrictive for our communities and our cultural groups. It's also had a very hard impact on our communities as far as COVID goes itself. I know the Lumbee tribe has been very active in testing in their communities, offering free testing for tribal members, as well as serving as a means by which they could provide food assistance for food insecurities in our community. So it's been a great way for them to not only test but also address the food insecurity issues in our tribal communities. For me myself, I've had it's been really tough on my family, not only my Sioux family in South Dakota, but the Lumbee community as well. I unfortunately have lost 4 relatives to COVID, 2 great aunts and 2 first cousins. I have currently have a first cousin who's in the hospital, but appears like he's going to pull through and hopefully to be discharged later this week. So it's been a very tough time for my family in South Dakota, as well as here in North Carolina. I talked to my younger brother today. I've had 2 younger brothers who have both tested positive, but one has recently been in contact with someone who had tested positive themselves as well. So he's been retested again, his 12th time for retesting. And so far he has not tested positive, but he did have a mild case earlier in the year. I myself have not really been in any types of situations where I've been exposed to COVID myself, but I do practice social distancing, washing my hands, wearing masks when possible, and just avoiding folks altogether. So it's been very restrictive, but obviously it's been the best thing we could possibly do in this current situation.
Thank you so much for that response. And I'm so sorry to hear about your family members who've been affected by the pandemic. So our next question, so as some of you may know this, I'm not sure if everyone does, but there are over 500 different Native tribes within the United States. So a lot of broader terms are used to categorize Native people, like Native Americans or American Indians. And this question is up for any of our panelists, but does the usage of these words affect you as individuals and communities as a whole? And are there any terms you'd prefer for people outside of the Native community to use when referring to Native people?
I'll hop on this question first. I think from my perspective as a Native student growing up in more of a conservative southeastern North Carolina town, you hear a lot of different words thrown around to describe my people, whether that be Indians, Native Americans, American Indians. I think as long as they're representing us in a way that is respectful to our culture and who we are as a resilient people, as long as we're getting that recognition that we've so long deserved, whatever title they call us, more specifically rather Native American, is probably the most respectful, or Indigenous. Those two are probably primarily what myself and my other Native youth that I'm in with NICNAO, we call ourselves. And that's a really good question now that we're getting into the topic of, the Washington football team and other professional teams or even high school teams, their school mascot names. That's a really good thing that needs to be talked about and addressed because, using someone's culture or identifications for someone's culture as something to be deemed as, a mascot or something that you can, use as a celebratory, maybe deemed good in somebody's eyes, but when you really get to the bottom or address the issue of it, it comes off as a little bit disrespectful. But to answer your question in blatant terms, Native American or Indigenous for myself.
Thank you so much for answering that question. So our next question is primarily for our Lumbee panelists. The Lumbee are currently trying to become fully federally recognized. So what would this mean for the Lumbee tribe, and why is this recognition so important to your people?
I guess I will offer my opinion. Well, I grew up in Pembroke, so I grew up in the culture of the Lumbee, of my mom's heritage, and for me, what has always been disappointing was whenever we picked up a map or read in a book, you looked at the tribes that were recognized by the federal government or recognized period, and you never saw the Lumbee listed. You didn't see the Kerry or the Waccamaw-Siouan or the Meherrin or the Halawa-Saponi or the Occaneechi or the Saponi, but you could always find Cherokee, and for me, it's really about identification. It's recognition that we are Native people, we are American Indians, we are Indian, we are Indigenous, and so that's why it's been most important for me, and I'm obviously much older than Zoey is, obviously, but for me it was that recognition, that identification as Native people, and for us, really, we've been fairly invisible as Indian people of the Southeast, including the Cherokee. People don't tend to think of Indians living east of the Mississippi. They tend to think we're all west of the Mississippi. And so for us, who were the first people to encounter the non-natives who came to our country, we had a lot to live through. And for some of us, we hid in the swamps of Robeson County. And unfortunately for the Cherokee, they were forced to the west to Oklahoma, and they encountered the Trail of Tears. In the Eastern Band Cherokee who live there in the mountains were people who either hid or stayed behind or escaped, and continued to live on their homelands, because obviously where we're from is very important to all of our tribal groups. And so that recognition for me as a Lumbee is very important, and I support the recognition efforts that they've made thus far.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to make any comments on that? I know we have quite a few Lumbee panelists here tonight,
So I'll jump in and ditto everything that Kerry said, but for me too, I look at it as the lifeline for our people, because in Robeson County, one of the poorest counties in the state, our people are suffering from drug use, unemployment, poor health, and of course, federal recognition will help in all of those areas, especially for healthcare. And the new opportunities that it could bring to a poor community also, for infrastructure, new businesses, just whatever federal recognition could bring. It could only, help our people in Robeson County. I grew up there. I grew up, it's like I tell people I grew up poor and didn't know it. And so it's a lot different than what it was when I was coming up. And so things have changed. I have, my brothers, nephews, nieces, and I've seen them all go through a lot of trials and tribulations, which I, would hope that federal recognition could help change that and make life a lot better for my people there.
Thank you so much, Ms. Locklear. That actually leads us into the last question of this section. Approximately 1 in 3 Native Americans are living in poverty in the U.S., according to the Institute for Policy Research. So because of this alarming statistic, how do you think the U.S. government can work with tribal leaders to promote the economic well-being of Indigenous communities? And anyone can answer this question.
Could you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah. So approximately 1 in 3 Native Americans are living in poverty in the U.S. So with that in mind, how do you think the U.S. government can or should be working with tribal leaders to promote the economic well-being of Indigenous communities?
Well, I think one of the things that comes with federal recognition is more assistance with economic development, building your own business, a small business association from the federal government. But also for the Cherokee, they've been very successful with their gaming operation. And I think that has really impacted their community. It's kind of one of those things that there's pros and cons. Obviously with the gaming operation in Cherokee, it changes the feeling of the community when you have this huge gaming complex in the middle of Cherokee, and that certainly changes the look and feel of the community. But at the same time, it's been the most successful economic development project for any Native communities that have been successful at operating gaming themselves. And there are some, like my tribe in South Dakota, we have three casinos. And while they're not as successful as something like the Cherokee, because we have many more members in our community and our tribal community there, it's been good for healthcare and tribal schools, building providing assistance for the elders of the community. So it's provided those types of things that it's given people a hand up instead of a handout. And so I think that's one of the things that's beneficial for tribes that have federal recognition and have those sovereign relationships with the federal government. They're able to work with them in conjunction with their elected officials as well as the government itself. And she can probably talk a lot more about this than I.
Hello, my name is Melissa Lee. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear, so I was trying to get off of my phone and then get onto my daughter's computer. So sorry about that. I missed the other questions. But to answer your question, I'm a Navajo Indian. I came from, I live. I'm actually from Tuba City, Arizona. And the Navajo Reservation consists of 4 states, which is Arizona, New Mexico, a little bit of Utah, and Colorado. With our Navajo tribe, they have a government within the tribe. So then they decide what type of businesses get on the reservation. They do have a few casinos. They did not have that for a while. They just started it probably about 5 years ago. So it's new to them. But as far as the government helping, they have help, but not that much. There's still a lot of things going on that needs to be settled. But there is the United States government, and then there's the Navajo tribe government. So then they have to go through that, and they have their own laws and all their own system to go through. And they have things where businesses can come to it, but they go through a different process. So I wouldn't say a few. There is kind of a lot of businesses, but it's rare, and there's a lot of things that go into it. I would just say, if you could, come out here and not be on the reservation and just go, okay, I want a business of a pizza place. It's easier to start it here than it is on the Navajo reservation, because you go through another process of you have to go through different things to channel in and say, okay, I want to establish this place. So that's the only thing that's difficult. But again, they have their own criterias of what they want. That's the other thing for our tribe. I'm sorry I missed on the other questions, but that's all I have.
You're totally fine. Thank you so much for that response, though. And thank you to all the panelists who've answered questions in this section. Those are some very enlightening responses, and I'm sure people in the audience have also really appreciated those answers. So I will now turn it over to Sophia and Makayla, who will be moderating the next section of this panel on education.
Hi, yes, thank you, Noreen. So to start us off, about 40% of Americans do not realize that Indigenous people still exist. And part of this is due to the fact that Indigenous cultures are either not spoken about or not accurately portrayed in schools. And when we surveyed students at our own school, we found that many had very inconsistent experiences with learning about Indigenous and Native American cultures and history. With that in mind, how did you learn about Native American cultures in your own school, and how did that affect you? I'll direct this at Miss Gwen Locklear to start, and anybody else can jump in after her.
Okay, could you repeat what you asked?
Yeah, how did you learn about Native Americans in your school history classes, and how did that affect you?
So you mean when I was growing up?
Yes.
Okay. Well, when I was growing up in school, I went to an all-Indian school until I was in 8th grade. In Robeson County, we were still segregated up until the late 60s, early 70s. So we weren't really taught about Indian culture, because everybody in my school and the teachers, everybody was Indian. So it was like, you knew that's what you were, and there wasn't a whole lot of actual things being taught. I remember vaguely about, some of the Western tribes and teepees and all that, but it never, it never referred to us directly. It was just you just took it for granted. You had your grandmothers and grandfathers that, taught you things that was just normal stuff, I guess. And it wasn't apparent to me about Indian culture until I left home. So, if you're Indian and you grew up in an Indian community and, all your friends are Indian, and, it was not until I was in junior high and high school that the schools were, desegregated, that it was like, we welcomed everybody into our schools, and there were issues about desegregating the schools, but it was more so with parents and grandparents than it was with students. We didn't have any issues with new students coming in. And in high school, we started going to powwows, and we had Lumbee homecoming, and so there was just things that just came natural. So we weren't taught anything in an Indian community.
I didn't grow up specifically in Cherokee. I grew up in Weaverville, which is about 20 minutes outside Asheville. And the only education I got was at Thanksgiving. We would wear, the feathers and the pilgrim hats, and that was really about it. I think in high school, I got one little snippet about the Trail of Tears. Everything I learned from my parents and my aunts and my uncles. And so it didn't really, I wouldn't say it really bothered me that I didn't learn in school, because I already knew. And then it wasn't until I got older that I'm like, wow, like people don't really think that we're still here. Like people think we're gone, we're dead, we're extinct. And it's really made me want to educate people and to share information about my culture and who I am, and that we're still here, we're resilient, and it's change the narrative that happens around Thanksgiving. That's a biggie for me, is changing this narrative of this happy little feast that everybody sat down and had, and that was definitely probably not the case. It wasn't the case. So, really pushing for education, and teaching our kids to educate people. That's one of my big missions, is teaching our kids to go out and how to, have people ask them questions and not get offended, because 9 times out of 10, people just don't know, and they're not trying to offend you. They just really want to know. So got very little education in high school, all the way through high school. I'm lucky that I live in Western North Carolina. I go to Western Carolina University. And so they really work really closely with the Eastern Band, and have really grown their Cherokee Studies program and really educating on that level. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Chi, and that segues perfectly into our next question, which I will first direct at Ms. Lee, since she is a parent of a student in Wake County. In what ways do you think North Carolina educational facilities can improve on teaching about Indigenous history?
I have a daughter. Actually, I had 3 of them that went through the Wake County public school system. That they really, it was hard for them to adjust, because they were given, okay, oh, you're Philippine, or you're Chinese, Oriental, so they got all different varieties. But as far as them being welcome, it was hard, and dealing with who they are, that was another thing. But what kept them grounded was that we were involved in the Wake County Indian Education Program. That's what kept them going. Oh, that's what it is. Oh, guess what? You're American Indian. Oh, great. So it was another thing for them to say, oh, there's other Indians here. So it kept them grounded in that aspect of who they are. It wasn't, for me, it was different going back to the system of the schools. I grew up on the Navajo reservation and went to school there. So everybody was the same. They were all Navajos. It was no big deal. The only thing was, there'll be a black coming in or a white Anglo coming in, and that was different. They were minorities. So everybody was all Navajos there. So we knew that. But when some outsider came in, we knew, oh, they're different. So that was different for me. And I never experienced that until I left the reservation. Then that was a whole new ball game. And it was like, whoa, this is weird. So in my kids, we lived off of the reservation. My husband and I, we went to different states. And so they experienced different avenues of different different backgrounds of different people. So it was hard for them to associate, I'm a Navajo. This is where I grew up, or this is how they speak. So we had to put it into them. And then when they dealt with the schools, North Carolina was really the basic foundation of American Indians. Of, okay, we can do this, we can do that. And then Gwen was there that helped us along with each one of my kids. So in that aspect, the Wake County Public School System with the Indian education did a good job on helping the kids say, okay, this is who you are. Now keep up with this culture and discover more about yourself. And so that's what I would, suggest. And with now that they recognize the having the Indigenous Peoples Day in October, and then the month of November, which is going to be a great foundation for the American Indians and the students, so that they'll say, okay, and they're proud of it, instead of, they were kind of putting on, so to speak, the back burner of, oh, who are you? And they wouldn't, they couldn't associate and say, hey, this is who we are. So, and again, with one of her, she said that we're extinct. And yes, that it became that when I was my youngest, she was like in 5th grade here in Wake County. And we went to one of the schools, and I had to actually introduce and say, hey, we're Navajos. This is who we are. This is what we do. And there was a lot of questions from the classmates saying, oh, do you guys live in teepees? Are you still around? And it was hard. And to say, this is who we are. This is what we do. We're just like you. We do the same things that you like, the same things that we dislike. It's basically the same. The only thing is our color of skin. That's it. So it was a new avenue for me, and new avenue for my kids, and just relating to classmates and saying, this is who we are.
So I'm so glad to hear that you had a good experience with the Indian education program through Wake County. Sophia, do you want to introduce the next question here?
Yeah, sure. I'll direct this at Mr. Bird. When students are taught about Native American cultures, what would you like the major takeaway for them to be?
Well, I think here in North Carolina, just be aware that, one, we're still here. We have 8 state-recognized tribes in North Carolina, and of course the Eastern Band of Cherokee have federal recognition as well. The Lumbee are kind of in between, because they were recognized in 1956 by U.S. Congress as a tribe, but not extended any of the services or benefits that typically came with federal recognition. So just kind of understanding what the current situation is for natives living here in North Carolina. North Carolina has the largest Indian population east of the Mississippi. It's home to the Lumbee, which is the 9th largest tribe in the country. We, like Miss Lee said, we pretty much live like everybody else lives, but we're just we're different because we don't keep to ourselves, but we do have certain things that we enjoy doing, like powwows and other cultural events. So just that we're still here. We're really no different than you are, but we do exist as a unique population group in the state. And I think our students, our adults, just need to just be aware that Natives are here. We shouldn't be forgotten. We do have opinions and perspectives of things. Like Zoey said earlier with the mascot issues, I didn't always have a problem with the Washington football team until they tried to say they were honoring us, and the more they tried to promote their understanding of what they were doing and discounting what we were saying and how we felt, was when I really took offense at what they were saying as to why they were wanting to be called their name. And so I think it's just those types of things that happen when you have mascot issues, that people dress up as natives with their paint on their faces and do the various chants and tomahawk chops and things like that I think are just where people have a misunderstanding of who we are and what we are and who we are and what we enjoy doing.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Bird. And I'm sure a lot of our other panelists would agree with you on those takeaways. So I'm going to direct this next question at Ms. Zoey Locklear, since she is a current student. What kind of support do you feel that Indigenous people or students specifically need? And what issues do you think that they specifically face as a whole?
Yeah, so both at Clinton High School and at Science and Math, where I'm an online student, I am a minority of minorities. So I am a Indigenous person, and I'm also an Indigenous female. So I have a unique perspective on the world and education, and I think that especially in my home school system here in Sampson County, which is the heart of the Kerry tribe, there are only a small number of us at my high school, and it can be really hard to navigate the social realm, educational realm of my school because there are so few of us. But my school system has done a really good job to catering to the needs of our Indigenous students. With our Indian Ed coordinator, Miss Alicia Leva, we have weekly meetings with her through our NASO program where we discuss topics that are kind of related to what problems we're facing, whether that be in the classroom with needed extra tutoring or outside of school, being able to go have access to cultural events, having transportation to that, just having an outlet to express our opinions, perspectives as Native students walking in two worlds, trying to balance both staying connected to our culture while studying in a westernized educational system. That can be very difficult for students. And I think as long as school systems and teachers, educators, administrators are listening to the needs of Native students and actually trying to combat the problems that we are, stepping up and speaking about, and educating themselves on our walks of life and our perspectives, then both parties will benefit. And that's something that I have personal experience with, being a student now, and being able to share the needs and necessary aspects that Native students need while trying to pursue higher education.
Well, thank you for that, Zoey. And so Ms. Gwen Locklear, as the Wake County coordinator, could you explain a little bit about what the Indian Education Program does to satisfy these specific needs that American Indian students have?
Sure. Well, Title VI Indian Education, it is a federal grant, and you have each school district or even tribes can apply for the grant. And it provide services to all of the American Indian and Alaska Native students in the Wake County school system. So in Wake County, we focus mainly on tutoring for our students because we want them to be equipped to learn and graduate from high school and further their education, and have the tools they need to do that. We contract with a private agency. Before COVID, students did have one-on-one tutoring with a tutor that is chosen for them specifically. And parents have been very pleased with that service. A lot of parents will come back and tell me that had it not been for the tutoring services that their child received, that they wouldn't have had the great experience in school that they did have. We do cultural activities, and before COVID, we actually met face-to-face, and we will bring in Indian artists from different tribes from across the state to come in and teach a cultural activity. Because our students here in Wake County in an urban area, mostly all of them don't know anything about being Indian and have never lived in an Indian community. And so there are those that do. And so those are the students that usually have the most problems and issues in assimilating into an urban school district and area, because they are isolated. Wake County is so huge and our numbers are so small. Most of the time there is only maybe one Indian student at a school. Sometimes there'll be one or two others, and if not for the program, they wouldn't even know they had there was another Indian student at their school. And so this program has really helped those students be proud of who they are and embrace their Native culture, learn about their Native culture, because some of them are, they come from parents who also grew up outside of their Indian community. So a lot of times parents will tell me that they learned a whole lot by being part of the program, because they didn't have anybody to, teach them some of the things or whatever we may be doing at the time. And so other than the cultural activities and the tutoring, we do have summer camps that we make available to the students who otherwise would not be able to afford to attend those summer camps and opportunities. We also do SAT and ACT prep and practice test. We do math workshops. We've done writing workshops. We have an American Indian Cultural Society with our high school students. And so I meet with those students and give them an opportunity to tell me what's going on in their schools, if there's any issues that they're having. And participation in that also earns them a beaded feather and a graduation stole for them to wear during graduation. And that's just part of honoring what they have accomplished by being a high school graduate. So that pretty much covers, I guess, everything through Indian Ed. But I've been with the program since the onset. Wake County has had it's been several different titles since I've been involved, but since 1996, there has been an Indian education program in the Wake County Public Schools. And so we're very small in numbers, and with the last 2 years, we have become more visible and more known in the school district. So that's been really great. Melissa Lee, who is parent committee president, through her efforts and some of the other efforts of parents and students that presented to the Wake County School Board asking for recognition of American Indian Heritage Month and Indigenous Peoples Day. And so through her efforts and the other parents that worked alongside her and students, we are now having a platform like this, which has never happened before.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to pass it over to Alexander now for our next section, where we'll be answering some audience source questions. So if you guys have any thoughtful, respectful questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll address those in the next section.
All right, so so here I'll be monitoring any audience questions. So right now, the audience is open to ask any questions. Just put it in the chat. But in the meanwhile, before we start, checking for any questions from the audience, we have some questions from the students of Wake County about Native communities. What do you wish, first off, what do you wish more people knew about American Indians? Just in general, this could be directed to anybody.
In general, I think I really want to just educate people, make sure that they know that we're still here, that, we're survivors, and that, just, anytime I teach, I just hope someone takes a little piece of knowledge away that they can share and learn to respect someone else's culture and want to learn more. Our nation is built on, Native people's lands. Like, you can throw a stone and it'll land on land that was occupied by Native people. So learn where you're at, who is on your land, and, just show respect to that. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for that. That was great. For our second question, this one's a little more interesting. What is your favorite aspect about being within an indigenous culture, whether it be, Lumbee, Diné, Lakota, or what is your favorite cultural activity? Again, anyone can, answer this one.
Yeah, I think my favorite aspect about my culture and my people would be the people. I know with COVID right now, I've really missed being able to meet with my elders and sit around, have a talking circle, being able to engage in community activities with NICNAO. We're having to do everything on a format, so that's kind of been really hard. But that's one thing that I really love about my Native community, and I know other Native communities as well, connecting with our relatives, our other tribal members. There's something surreal about that, whether that be at a powwow or ceremony or just a gathering together. That's something that I really enjoy, and I'm really glad that I get to partake in that through my culture. Yeah.
Thank you for that. That was pretty cool. Yeah. So for the last of these questions, so we have like, how has your specific culture helped you become the person you are today? Or if you want to, so how has any specific culture that you have like experienced or that maybe you grew up in help you become the person you are today? Yeah.
That question, I guess who I am right now is, just being a Navajo and being a female, like one of the panelists said. that being a female is a good thing. I was actually going into engineering, so being a female was a minority, and being a native was minority, so it was a double hit. So, but being that, it made it even special just to do that, and then just to learn of other people out there, and then just to be able to say, hey, and from now, I've lived in several states, just to know other people from other states and how they work their culture and who they are is a great, it is overall wonderful. I love meeting people, know who they are, where they came from, what kind of stuff do they do with their, with their family or whatnot. But my aspect along that is, the favorite thing I like is listening to Navajos speak their Navajo language. I listen to my relatives and they talk Navajo, and I love listening to it, and it makes me feel at home. And so that's what I love the most. And just being out there and getting to know people, and then it makes you grateful of who you are.
Yes, I would agree. Language is definitely a very important aspect. So for our first question from the audience, the first one is from Chilla. She says, is it possible to work with the current systems in place to decolonize education and societal structures? And if possible, how would it impact Native and non-Native populations? That's the first question from the audience.
Yeah, I think it's totally possible to decolonize education. It just depends on how hard people are willing to work to do that. No change comes easy. So it's going to have to be a complete reworking of starting with learning about Native people. Okay, so we know that Native Americans were the first people in North America. That's all that's being taught. The three sisters, corn, beans, and squash. Yeah, we know that about Native people, but what else? What other things can we be teaching students about Native people? Because after 1780, Native people, or 1850, Native people didn't just wipe from the country, right? We weren't just wiped from education. So I think because our history is still being written, it's still being retaken back as our own history, then we can further that and be able to teach that to others. So I think listening to Native people, inviting Native scholars in, or activists or speakers into communities, and referring to us with questions, trying to change the curriculum and education systems would be a great thing and great place to start with decolonizing education and making it more transparent in manner of speaking to the actual trials and tribulations that our country has gone through, and how Native people have been unjustly treated. Addressing the problem head on is going to help decolonization a whole lot.
Thank you. That was great. Yeah, especially about tackling education first, head on. Next question from the audience. What is a proverb in your language that stands out to you, and why? This one's interesting.
A proverb can also be like a saying or something that you learned in your culture.
I think it's not a proverb, but Cherokee people believe in Gadoogie. It's community. It's helping one another out. It's making sure people don't go without. So I think that's a big thing that stands out for us. And Gadoogie means more than community. It's hard to put it into words. I mean, it's community, it's family, it's just helping one another. So I feel like that's something in our culture and our language that really stands out.
In our language, or the Navajos anyway, is to respect your elders, because they had their own way of living, and you need to respect them of who they are and learn from them as well. So that was the main thing that we grew up as for me as a child. And so now, both of my grandparents passed away. So, I'm grateful that I got to spend time with them. But just to respect your elders was a great thing for me.
And for me, I think it's just that family relationships and community relationships. We always have the saying down home, "Who's your people?" And I think people are just trying to make that connection with each other, to find out what their family history is, their family bonds. I know for my family, I know multiple generations in the past, and so we always look for those connections with each other, because people didn't want to date their cousins and everything else. But it's just important to know where you came from and who you're related to, and even with our burial grounds, we have cemeteries, because a lot of Lumbee culture or Kahari culture or Wakansilan culture is basically North Carolina culture. It's Southern culture. The foods we eat, the way we practice our religion, is very much what the Southern culture is. I mean, part of our customs are what became Southern customs, and so that's just one of the things that I think is important to us is just knowing those connections with family and who you're from, where you're from.
Okay, so thank you. We have about 1 minute or less left for open audience questions, or if any of the panelists want to add anything else, any of the questions asked, it would go ahead, feel free. Or if anyone else in the audience wants to ask even more questions, we have about a minute or two, I know, to go ahead for that. But if not, I guess we can carry it over.
To speak a little bit about education and maybe decolonization of education in some ways, my language is dying. My language is becoming extinct. It's endangered. And I'm working really hard to learn who I am as Cherokee through my language. We have 193 fluent first speakers left. And COVID has really impacted that because, we can't go and sit with our speakers and learn from them. And technology, it's hard for them to use technology, and internet on the boundary is terrible. So I hope I'm not breaking up. So, it's a big push to really try to save who we are as a people, because without language, you don't know who you are. You can't understand where you come from and who your people are without it. So, making those connections to the past and who you were before, settlers arrived on our shores, it's huge. It's a big thing.
On that note, with language, since it's being extinct for your for Cherokees, what the Navajo did, or actually my aunties went and did, was they study that for their college education on that part, and then they went and did I guess went with Rosetta Stone. And so then they implemented the Navajo language with that. And so now there's a course of the Navajo language. And so you could do it step by step. And then they even took it even further, where the younger generation, they implemented on the reservation to the younger students, so that they can learn the language and to keep that going. And then they gave scholarships for the students that want to go to higher education. And one requirement is for them to know their language. So then they take a class in that, and then it keep on going. So that's an idea for the Cherokee.
Yeah, well, I'm a part. I think you came on late. I am a part of the adult immersion program at New Kadua Academy. So that's what I do for a job. A year and a half ago, I knew like 20 Cherokee words, and probably half of them I didn't really say very correctly. And so in the past year and a half, I mean, you know, I can hold a 15-20-minute conversation in my scope of knowledge in my language, because I spend 25 hours a week in class with our speakers. And my daughter goes to the immersion program at New Kadua, where we take our younger kids and they speak Cherokee to them all day, you know, while they're in school. And that's a K through 6th grade program. They teach in the language K through 3rd grade. And then after 3rd grade, they go to half the day in English, half the day in Cherokee. So we are trying to revitalize our language and to keep it alive. You know, it's just, you know, it's a struggle. It's hard. It's not the easiest language to learn. You know, they said they scale languages on a level 1 through 5, and our language doesn't even fit on that scale. Like, you know, they said it would be like a 7, maybe an 8. Like, it's just very descriptive, but we're trying. We're trying.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that you guys are working to keep your languages alive, and I really hope that goes well for you. And thank you so much to all of our panelists that joined us today, and we really hope that this panel has been able to spread some awareness about Indigenous people and in honor of Indigenous Heritage Month. So thank you to everybody else who came to listen and support this panel. And with that, we're going to close it out. Have a great evening, everybody, and happy holidays.
Thank you, everyone.
They gotta go home.
Thanks for coming.